Welcome everyone, and thank you for watching this important video on preventing teen dating violence. This video is particularly timing as this is October, Dating Violence Awareness Month. I'm Diane Doherty. I'm a supervising city attorney in the DV Sex Crimes Unit of the Office of the City Attorney. I'm also co-chair of San Diego Domestic Violence Council's Teen Dating Violence Committee. Our committee works to bring awareness to the issues of teen dating violence, or TDV, educate our community about TDV, and help eliminate TDV. During DV awareness and all year long, we work on a healthy dating protocol for schools to recognize and address TDV. Our committee members provide community trainings, outreach, and awareness events, all focused on teen dating violence. And our committee educators teach about teen dating violence at schools and in the community. These classes are virtual and in person. We want to keep all students safe from intimate partner abuse and hope through this video we can provide you the tools to do so as well. Thank you. And now I will turn it over to the other Teen Dating Violence Committee co-chair and our educator extraordinaire, Sabrina.
Hi, my name is Sabrina Van Zuden. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am a prevention and community engagement specialist with Center for Community Solutions here in San Diego. And Center for Community Solutions is a nonprofit that serves survivors of sexual violence, intimate partner violence, and stalking. So today we are going to be talking about teen dating violence. So Diane and I have introduced ourselves. We are both co-chairs of the Teen Dating Violence Committee of the San Diego Domestic Violence Council, and we are really excited to bring this topic and these materials to you today. So let's dive in. Diane spoke to this a bit, but our committee is part of the San Diego Domestic Violence Council, and both the committee and the council are interdisciplinary teams that have representatives from Health and Human Services, various San Diego nonprofits, education. We have representatives from different school districts, high school districts, and college campuses, representatives from law enforcement and other community partners, including individuals who just care a lot about this topic. And our goal is to increase awareness, prevention, and education around TDV in San Diego County. So an overview of what we're going to be discussing today. So by the end of the presentation, we're hoping that we'll be able to define TDV, become familiar with the signs and risk factors, learn strategies for how to respond, and identify local and national resources for support. So first up, before we even talk about what is dating violence or relationship violence, we have to define what are we talking about as a relationship. So a relationship could be defined, and I think most people, when they think about relationship violence or domestic violence, they think of a married couple, and that's valid. Absolutely, relationship violence can happen in that context, but it can happen in all of these other contexts as well. So relationship violence, teen dating violence can happen between people who are married or divorced, currently dating, formerly dating, friends with benefits, people who you've had one-night stands with, who you're talking with in person or online, hooking up with, matched on a dating app with, went on one date one time forever ago. All of these count. From a service provider perspective, all of these count as contexts in which relationship violence could happen. And the list is really limitless. But there's a couple things I want to point out here. So the first is, I think, as we're going through this presentation, I'm going to be asking you to sort of break down and kind of throw away some of the preconceived notions you may have about things like relationship violence, dating violence, domestic violence. And that includes this idea that if you're talking to someone who's experiencing it, the thing that you should say is, oh, you just need to leave that person. And we hear a lot that that's kind of the knee-jerk reaction a lot of us have when trying to support somebody. But if we look here at this list, right, we have married and divorced, currently dating, formerly dating, and we have people who have never even defined what their relationship means to them. So when we give that advice of just leave to someone, we're ignoring the fact that the violence dynamics can really extend past the life of the actual relationship. The other thing that I want to point out here is that it's really valid that people, and especially young people, won't refer to their romantic partnerships or whatever as actual relationships. And that's really valid. You can use whatever language you feel comfortable with to define your relationship to another person. But from a service provider standpoint, we recognize that violence can occur in any of these dynamics, and anyone who's experiencing violence in one of these types of relationships is eligible to seek out support. Dan, do you want to add anything?
No, you've covered it.
Okay.
I think that a lot of times adults may not validate what a teen or tween considers to be a relationship, or adults impose that term relationship on teens or tweens when they don't consider themselves in relationships.
Right.
And so we have to really recognize and take seriously how a teenager or tween describes their relationship, because to them it's very real.
Right. Absolutely. And I think most of the young people I talk to, if I bring up like, the people you're in a relationship with, they're like, whoa, 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 Sabrina. I'm just talking to them. And that, that's valid. That's totally valid. I don't have to define your relationship for you. And just so you know, if you experience violence in that context, you're eligible to, there are resources out there to support you. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about that and all of the above. So now let's go from defining a relationship to defining violence in the context of a relationship. So this is a definition that our committee has put forth, and we collaborated on this language, but we define teen dating violence as a pattern of violent, coercive, manipulative behaviors to gain power and maintain control over another person in a relationship. So what I want to point out here is that relationship violence and teen dating violence and intimate partner violence is really about this idea of power and control over someone else. One person in the relationship who is calling all the shots, one person in the relationship who has the ability to make the decisions and decide what happens and can control the actions of the other person. And abuse can happen online or in person, which I think as we're experiencing an increasingly virtual world now, I think it's really important to validate that this pattern of power and control can happen however people can communicate, right? And that can be virtually, that can be through texting or social media, or it could be physically in person. And it includes physical violence, sexual violence, emotional, verbal, financial violence, and stalking. So thinking again about how many people have this preconceived notion that dating violence, relationship violence is dependent on the presence of physical violence. And that absolutely happens. That's absolutely a warning sign. And the definition of this type of violence is power and control. It's not physical violence. So somebody could use sexual, emotional, verbal, financial violence, et cetera, to have that dynamic of power and control. And physical violence may be present or not. But regardless, these type of behaviors, and we'll talk more about warning signs in a bit, but just breaking down this idea that if it's not physical, it doesn't matter, because it absolutely matters. And it matters for health outcomes. It matters for how the person experiencing that feels about themselves and moves through their day-to-day. And I'll stop there because we're going to talk about it. And Diane, if at any point you want to jump in, feel free to do so.
Thank you, Sabrina.
So talking a little bit more about power and control. So again, all of these types of violence, not just physical violence, may be present, and the purpose is to have this power and control that is crucial to the definition of teen dating violence. And all forms of abuse are rooted in this intentionally constructed dynamic of power and control. And so again, as we're telling survivors, oh, you just need to leave that person, we're ignoring the fact that there are really intentional barriers that are created to prevent somebody from leaving an abusive relationship, right? So that could be, if somebody says, I want to leave, I want to break up, and then the other person makes physical threats or is physically threatening, they use all these other forms of power and control to ensure that that person doesn't leave. So when we're thinking about giving the advice to someone, hey, just leave that person, we're not taking into account the fact that that's actually really difficult. It's not as easy as saying just leave, right? There's so many factors that go into that. And part of it is this intentionally constructed dynamic that is set up to prevent somebody from just leaving.
Right, and just to jump in for a second, one of the examples of barrier that we're seeing more often than not today in this digital age is the use of sexting or pictures of another form or text. You know, if you leave me, I'm going to share that photo or that text with everybody. And so as Sabrina mentioned in the prior slide, that's not physical abuse, but it is still a way of maintaining power and control over your partner. Sabrina, can you explain a little bit about how power and control is happening today during COVID's quarantine?
Yeah, so if we think about just what power and control really means, right? It means, again, somebody's be able to make all the decisions. Somebody is keeping a close watch on the other person. And, you know, it's just a lack of autonomy and agency on the part of one person. So if we think about how if folks are living together and in quarantine, there's so much close contact in quarters with each other, right? And so being able to make a private phone call, being able to access resources without worrying that somebody's overhearing you in the other room or from 2 feet away, right? And, you know, if our teens, you know, aren't living with each other in their relationships, although many do, if we think about how does it show up virtually, because it's so much of the response to COVID has been, how can we put this online? How can we shift to online? How can we shift our schools to be online? So much of our way of engaging with each other has turned to online. And just as Diane spoke to it, humans are unfortunately really creative in the ways that they try to seek out power and control over others. So, you know, if I'm thinking about this web platform that I'm using to go to school at, and there's a private messaging function, you know, like Zoom, then I could absolutely be experiencing, you know, relationship violence while I'm at class, like in school on my Zoom, getting private messages from somebody who's either harassing me or, you know, saying things that are distracting me from my schoolwork. Or, you know, if teens are having their relationships go more virtual, then sometimes there is that opportunity, like Diane said, to use somebody's sexting messages or pictures to exploit them in that way. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So onward, some statistics. So nationally in the US, 1 in 3 teens will experience physical, sexual, emotional, or verbal abuse from a dating partner. So that is a very high number. And we'll talk about San Diego specific statistics in a moment. And out of dating teenagers, 1 in 4 will experience harassment through technology. And the statistic is pre-COVID times, right? So now that we're seeing even, you know, we were always seeing a rise in connection through technology, but now with COVID, since that is the main form of communication with others and a way of engaging with peers, you know, we don't know what the true number is right now. But the number we do have is 1 out of 4, 25% of all dating teenagers will experience harassment through technology. The flip side to that, I think, is that 74% of boys and 66% of girls report not having talked to parents or guardians about dating abuse, about experiencing it. So, you know, that's almost three-fourths of boys and almost 2/3 of girls won't talk to what we would assume would be their trusted adult about experiencing something like this. And on the other side, right, 82% of parents, so a large majority of parents, feel confident that they could recognize the signs if their child was experiencing dating abuse. But again, a majority, 58%, could not correctly identify all the warning signs. So not only do we have a gap in teens aren't really talking to adults about this issue, about experiencing this, and parents are a little bit overconfident in their ability to recognize these signs. You know, there's a gap there in who's able to be connected to services and get support and have intervention to move past it and heal from what's going on as they're moving towards adulthood. And on that note, violent behavior typically begins between the ages of 12 and 18. So I think a lot about how a lot of times I hear from adults, well, you know, that's just puppy love. That's just how it is when you're a teenager. That's just, they're still learning and stuff. But the violent behavior is learned and is practiced between the ages of as young as 12 and 18, right? And so the folks who are causing harm at this age and the folks who are experiencing harm at this age are becoming adults and are likely going to be falling into those same patterns that they're practicing as young people. And so just like Diane said before, we really need to think about how are we validating or invalidating young relationships? Because if we take the approach of, they're just teens, it doesn't matter, then we're doing such a disservice to those young people. We're not allowing young people to seek out support, right? We're not creating a safe network of folks that they could come to if they did need help. And we're not setting them up for success in the future, both as people who are experiencing harm and causing harm.
And Sabrina, I just want to reflect a moment on that, the percentages of parents not talking to their tweens and teens about dating violence. As a parent of a tween and a teen, those conversations are really hard. They're really difficult. You know, the tweens and the teens roll their eyes, they walk out of the room. They don't want to have those conversations with their parents either. So if they're not talking to their parents, who are they talking to? They're talking to their friends, or they're looking things up on the internet. And those are not always the best resources. So for you parents out there who are watching this, or teachers or adults in any manner, you know, making yourself available, whether it be while you're driving a car with a group of kids, you know, that you're driving home from a sporting event, maybe in a non-COVID time, or really getting creative and using opportunities to engage and have those difficult conversations, because they are important. You may not think your children are listening to you, but they are, and they're tucking that information into the back of their brain. And if they ever witness someone else where they find themselves in that type of a relationship, believe it or not, they will pull that information forward and utilize it. So don't be afraid to have those uncomfortable conversations. And you will see throughout this presentation, there are sources like on the bottom of this screen. And those sources are wonderful references for yourself for information and also for your children. Thanks, Sabrina.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you raise a great point, Diane, when thinking about what do these statistics mean for us, you know, in terms of like, what can we do about it? For adults, I think that means this is really a call to make yourself a safe person that young people feel comfortable disclosing to or asking help from. And that means being a non-judgmental person. And this also makes me think, just like you said, Diane, if young people aren't talking to adults about it, they're probably talking to each other about it or looking it up online. And so for young people watching this, how can you be, and we'll talk more about this in a few slides, but like, how can you make sure that you are the friend that can be supportive to somebody if they're experiencing this? And I don't mean, you know, that's yours to do alone, that's your cross to bear, whatever. But I mean, like, are we setting up young people to know where to go if this happens, or who to ask for support from, or what websites to look up that'll have information that's trusted and advice that's helpful? So we will talk about resources in a few slides, but I appreciate this conversation. So some other national statistics. So 1 in 11 female teens and 1 in 15 male teens will experience physical dating violence. And 18% of lesbian, gay, and bisexual students, and we only use lesbian, gay, and bisexual because of the nature of the study. That's what the study measured, is only these 3 sexual orientations. We know there are many more sexual orientations than just lesbian, gay, or bisexual, but 18% of lesbian, gay, or bisexual students compared to 8% of straight students experience physical dating violence. And so what that is, a disproportionate amount for our LGBT students. And then that's sort of mirrored in sexual dating violence, in which sexual dating violence is experienced by 1 in 9 female teens and 1 in 36 male teens. Furthermore, again, experienced by 18% of LGBT students compared to 5% of straight students. And I want to point out that these statistics in themselves are really binary in that they're only looking at, excuse me, they're only looking at two genders. They're attempting to look at two genders, right? Girls and boys. But what we know about gender is that there are many more genders than just these two genders, and we don't have the statistics yet to describe non-binary students, genderqueer students, transgender students' experience with teen dating violence. But what we do have is the 2015 US Transgender Survey that found that 54% of all trans, genderqueer, and gender nonconforming people will experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime. So that is over a 1 in 2 statistic that's vastly disproportionate for a population, a subpopulation that is not 54% of the entire population, right? So I think these statistics really call us to think about, as we're talking about intervention services, as we're talking about support services and prevention, are those networks that we're building equipped and robust enough to support our students from the LGBTQIA+ community? Because if they're not, then we are seriously lacking, and we are, it's truly a call to make sure that our services are accessible by all of our students. And again, one of the preconceived notions that I think people have about partner violence, relationship violence, teen dating violence is that it's a thing that's only experienced by women and only perpetrated by men. And that's just completely untrue, right? Any person of any gender or sexual orientation can experience harm and does experience harm, like we're seeing with these statistics. And a person of any gender or any sexual orientation can cause harm. So I think that's just a call for us to remember that and incorporate that knowledge in our services moving forward. So some San Diego specific statistics. These statistics do come from the San Diego Unified School District Youth Risk Behavior Survey of 2019. And the reason we have this is because SDUSD opted into these questions. So although it is specific to SDUSD, I do believe that they are likely representative of what the San Diego teens experience more broadly. So on the side here, we have people who have experienced physical violence, sexual violence, and emotional violence. And then, so for all students, about 6.1% experience physical dating violence, 10.4%, so 1 in 10 experience sexual dating violence, and 20% of all students, so 1 in 5 of all SDUSD students experience emotional dating violence. And what we see is that as we go up across this chart, these numbers just continue to increase and over double. So for students who identify as lesbian, gay, or bisexual, that 14.5, so over double experience physical dating violence, over double for all students experience sexual dating violence, and just about double experience emotional dating violence. And then into this column, which is students who have had sexual contact with their same or multiple genders. So people who didn't necessarily identify with the labels of lesbian, gay, or bisexual, but have had sexual contact with someone of their same or multiple genders. We see nearly, for some of these, almost triple numbers, right? So 6.1% jumps up to 17.9. We have 23.4 here. And this one is really staggering to me, is that 50.5% of all of these students are experiencing emotional dating violence. So that's over 1 in 2 again. So I guess, again, this again is calling us to rethink what we know about dating violence. It is not just a physical violence issue, although it absolutely is, these numbers support that. But if somebody's talking to us about the way that they're experiencing harm from their partner, and they're talking about, they're saying they're putting me down all the time, they are manipulating me, all of these things should really, bring this presentation to our minds, and we should recognize that for what it is, which is dating violence.
Right, and another example of that, thank you, Sabrina. Many of these high school students are trying to discover who they are and maybe experimenting. And if you've got one partner who's saying, well, I'm going to tell everyone, and that person doesn't really know who or what they are at that point, that control of I'm going to out you or I'm going to say something can be very damaging. And that, again, is reflected in that 50.5% statistic, which is really staggering.
Yes, and thank you so much for bringing that up, Diane. If you can recall, or maybe rewind this video back to when we were on the power and control slide, one of those things were social and identity abuse. And that encompasses this experience, right? Somebody using their social identity that has maybe more power, more privilege in a way that harms the partner whose social identity has less power or privilege. So if one student who identifies as queer is dating one student who identifies as straight, and that person uses that as leverage to say, if you don't do X, Y, and Z, then I will out you. Or if you don't do X, Y, and Z, then I'm going to tell your parents, I'm going to post it on social media. That is a huge way that power and control can show up. And I think that, like Diane, like you said, I think that sort of speaks to why these statistics are higher. So risk factors. And these risk factors are from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and they speak to specifically risk factors of causing harm. So if these risk factors are present, somebody is more likely to commit dating violence against somebody else. What we also see is that a lot of these risk factors parallel to somebody experiencing harm. And I think that is something to think about for us as we shape prevention and intervention services. How are we making sure that everyone involved in the situation is supported in a way that the violence does not continue into the future? So some of these risk factors include a history of physical violence in the home by either experiencing physical violence themselves or witnessing it between others. Adherence to traditional gender norms, so traditional ideas of masculinity and femininity, excessive alcohol use, risky sexual behavior, which can include not using contraceptives. It can include having sex while under the influence, or having sex in a place where you're not familiar where your surroundings are, so a place that's unknown to you. And those four that I just mentioned are pretty individual experiences, something that one person might experience in their life, and to some degree have some thought or control over. But then we have these next four, which are really community issues and societal issues. And so those include poverty or low socioeconomic status, exposure to community crime and violence, social norms, broader social norms that are supportive of sexual violence, and weak laws and policies related to sexual violence. So what we hear here, what I'm hearing in this is that it's not enough to prevent or intervene on the individual level, right? We need to think about how are we setting up the systems of our community to address this issue? How are we making sure that folks have the resources to live and be and exist and have food on the table? Because those are parts of violence prevention. And, just calling us to think of dating violence and relationship violence not solely as an individual issue, but as a community issue, as a societal issue that we need to intervene and prevent in these different individual to systemic arenas.
And Sabrina, I appreciate you raising the fact that these are risk factors on both sides of the relationship. The person who's causing harm, these are risk factors in that person's life. And then the person who is being harmed, these are risk factors in that person's life. That these personal and community factors are relate to both sides of the equation. So I think a lot of people tend to look at the person being victimized, but to solve this problem, we also have to look at the side of the person who's perpetrating the violence. We can't just look at this as a one-sided problem. So I appreciate that you're pointing out that these risk factors are for both sides of the equation.
Yeah. And so when we move on to protective factors, so again, from the CDC, again, these protective factors exist not just on the individual level, but on the community and societal level as well. So having high friendship quality is a protective factor. So for my young people out there, you know, what does it mean to you to be a good friend, a supportive friend, a non-judgmental friend? And are you checking in on your friends? Do you have the capacity to? You know, because we know that a lot of folks aren't talking to adults about this. And, you know, sometimes that's the way it goes. It's really valid that teens want to connect with each other and away from adults. That's a valid part of the human experience. So are our young people set up to feel supported in supporting their friends? Other social support, meaning tangible help, connection to a caring adult. So for our adults who are watching, you know, again, calling on you to be that non-judgmental, safe person, caring person that somebody could reach out to in a pinch. Community support, which is, you know, different from these individual supports, but, you know, community cohesiveness, feeling a part of a group, feeling a part of a supportive, connected, mutually respectful community. And, you know, having a community norm in which we intervene for the common good. So, and by that, I mean a community that it's in which it's normal to call out and call in for problematic behavior, where it's normal to check in on your neighbors and it's normal to check in with others around you to say, hey, are you okay? Do you have what you need? Are you feeling supported? Do you need anything that I can help you out with, right? So having that community cohesiveness and being a part of a whole. And then lastly, we have coordination of resources and services among community agencies. So even just existing on the Teen Dating Violence Committee within the San Diego Domestic Violence Council, right? I've had referrals from and to like some of my other colleagues who work in the field but don't work at my agency, right? And being able to coordinate our services to have a more wraparound model to make sure that all the needs that an individual would have would be met by our different agencies and our different services. Because there are lots of services going on in San Diego. There's a lot. And we just need to know how to tap into them. And the agencies themselves need to know, you know, if I can't meet this need, you know, I know that this other agency can. And so let's get you connected. And so the importance of having that coordination, right? And so for folks watching who work in schools, you know, does your school have a connection to these community agencies? Do you have go-to people within your school that you can tap into? You know, do the teachers have a good working relationship with admin, and do they have a good working relationship with counseling and the social worker and the nurses, right? And making sure that people like the people who are supporting the people directly experiencing them, the harm, right? Like there's networks of support that just like kind of branch out and everyone is supported in supporting others.
Right, and again, I think these protective factors also go to the side of the relationship that's causing the harm, right? We need to be as equally supportive there because that's the way we end this problem. And then I also think during COVID, this community support is so important because we're all so isolated, you know, we're all socially distancing. Taking that moment to just check in, as Sabrina mentioned, with your neighbor, with your, you know, your child's friend, etc., will go a long way during this time of separation. Excuse me.
Thanks. Yeah. And I'm thinking too, for school administrators or folks with higher levels of leadership, have you created an opportunity for the different members of your school or organization to network with each other, to be familiar with each other's services, to be familiar with the services at the school district or county office of education level? Like, you know, is there that coordination and intentional coordination of resources and services among your school community, among your larger community? So this is a slide, I joke, this is the slide that you all came for, the warning signs. And then the next slide is going to be what to do about it. But so some warning signs that teen dating violence is happening. So again, all of these warning signs are examples of ways that power and control are showing up in a relationship. So if you want the most comprehensive warning sign ever, is there a warning sign of somebody who has more power or control over another person in that relationship. At the root of it, that's what we're talking about. But here's some concrete things that might show up. So if somebody is checking cell phones, emails, or social media without permission, right? I think there is this idea amongst young people, especially young people who grew up with technology, that if you're in a relationship, you have a right to somebody's social media passwords, you have a right to their cell phone, because under the guise of, if you have nothing to hide, it shouldn't be an issue, right? Or this is a way to show a commitment to somebody. I'm so committed to you, I'm gonna give you my Instagram password. That's the level of trust we have with each other. But the thing is, people deserve their right to privacy. It's not necessarily that they're hiding something outright, you know, it doesn't mean that somebody's cheating on another person, but just for a sense of safety, people deserve a right to privacy and deserve rights to boundaries, and setting those boundaries, including on social media or with their technology. So for somebody to either demand permission or demand passwords or demand access to somebody's phone or to check it without permission, that is a big warning sign that that person is trying to, is making an effort to exert power and control over somebody else through their technology. We also have extreme jealousy or insecurity. And this on its own, right, some folks, jealousy is a really normal emotion that people experience, but when it becomes problematic is when somebody takes that emotion and they use it as a reason to justify trying to limit somebody else's behavior or influence somebody else's behavior, right? So I might be jealous that my partner is spending time with someone else, right, a friend of theirs. But if I take that jealousy and I tell my partner, hey, you need to block them on social media. You can't hang out with them again. I don't like them. And that's just how it is. That's me exerting power in a way, or using my jealousy or insecurity to exert power over that person, to manipulate their behavior into what I want to see. And that's really tied to, you know, a couple bullet points down, this idea of isolation, right? Because if we're talking about protective factors, being connection to resources, connection to other people, having healthy relationships in your friendships and with the adults in your life, you know, isolating someone is such a common and widespread tactic in the world of dating violence, right? Isolating someone from, you know, their supportive networks, which could be their friends, it could be their family members, it could be their coworkers, anyone, you know, and a lot of times jealousy is used as kind of the roadmap to the isolation. Possessiveness and or tracking location through technology, right? So I find it really, a lot of people share their location with people they trust and love as a way to protect themselves, or, you know, as a way to feel safer, right? I feel safer knowing that my loved one knows where I'm at. And that's great and fine. The problem is when somebody demands someone else's location or uses that privilege of knowing someone's location in a way that is causing harm. So if I'm monitoring my partner's location to say things like, you know, you didn't tell me you were going to be at that place, that's not okay. And then there's a punishment for that, right? Or saying, you know, trying to trap somebody in a lie, right? Again, we're going back to this, everyone deserves a right to privacy and a right to boundaries, and, you know, using a location or trying to be possessive over someone is a warning sign of dating violence. Having an explosive temper or constant mood swings directed at a partner is absolutely a warning sign. Constant belittling or put downs, right? So when we're talking about, you know, 1 in 5 of all students are experiencing emotional dating violence. And this is one of the ways that happens, right? Constantly putting someone down, making them feel less than, making them feel inferior, making them feel dependent on you, right? So saying like, you would be nothing without me, or without me, you wouldn't make it, you wouldn't be successful without me, right? And all of these things count and are part of this intentional construction of this idea of power and control. Making threats or false accusations. So this can include, you know, if I was trying to break up with a partner and they said, if you break up with me, I will hurt myself, I will hurt you, I'll hurt the people you care about. That is a really common and a really big red flag. Telling someone what they can and cannot do. repeatedly pressuring someone to have sex, physically inflicting pain or hurt in any way. And just a note here is that we want to be really listening, and this is a call for the adults and the young people who are watching this, listening for language about either they put their hands around my neck, or they choked me, or they strangled me, or something around that, because strangulation, the presence of strangulation in a relationship increases the risk of that person dying by 700%. So if if somebody has experienced that, the risk that they will die by that partner increases by 7 times. So if there was a red flag waving, that would be one of the biggest. So if you were feeling conflicted about saying something or offering support, that is the biggest call that action is needed now.
That's right. Because strangulation is usually an escalation, right? Maybe it starts with emotional abuse, and then it starts with the explosive tempers, the put downs, moving into verbal and then into physical. But by the time you get to strangulation, you are at the top, and you are really, as a victim of harm, you are really at risk. And so as friends, as parents, as adults, if you see marks up behind the ear, if you see what's called petechiae, red marks in the eyes, you really need to kind of step in a supportive, non-judgmental way and see if you can find out what's going on, because strangulation is serious.
Yes. And Diane actually taught me this, but especially virtually, right? Through Zoom, I can barely see Diane right now in the corner of my screen. It's hard to see. It's hard to see the physical signs of it, right? So in addition to looking for the physical signs, it's also listening for that language, right? And a lot of the time someone might play off the severity of something, right? And say like, oh, we were fooling around, they just put their hands on my neck, or they just, they pushed me up against the wall by my neck or something, and just like, try to downplay how serious it is. But if you're hearing that language of anything having to do with violence around the neck, then that is, like Diane said, that is a serious risk factor that we're asking you all to take action around.
And so I want to make one more comment. I believe the statistic is 50% that there are not physical injuries or visible injuries in 50% of the strangulation instances. So just because you're not seeing something physical, or you're not hearing a raspy voice, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not happening. So again, as Sabrina mentioned, really listen for the verbiage from your youth.
Yes. Thank you, Diane. Coming in with cool facts. So effects of TDV. So these are things that someone might experience as a secondary sort of experience after experiencing TDV. That was me trying to use the word experience as many times as possible in one sentence. But effects of teen dating violence can include misuse of substances. It can include eating disorders. It can include risky sexual behavior. It can include further intimate partner violence in college, either experiencing it or, perpetrating it. Experience symptoms of depression and anxiety, antisocial behaviors like lying, theft, bullying, or hitting, or suicidal thoughts or actions. So when we're thinking about TDV, we have this one issue where harm is being caused, right? But we also have all of these secondary issues that are happening. And so from a public health perspective, we need to be taking this seriously as a community, as a society. From a mental health perspective, this is an important thing to think about and talk about and address, right? So I think there is a lot of movement and motion in things like suicide prevention, or normalizing the conversation about mental health. And TDV has a hand in those movements, right? And so as we're talking about these other, awareness events, and we're talking about other campaigns, and all of those provide another opportunity to discuss and address TDV as well. So the other slide, the other slide that I think folks are looking for is how to respond. So we've just talked a lot about warning signs and risk factors, but what do I do if I'm talking to someone and I hear, oh, I think that they are experiencing this, right? And so our first advice is to listen, validate, and empathize, and just really consider, what does that mean? So I think we need to think, for adults listening to this, consider the ways that young people are often not listened to, right? They might get one sentence out and then the adult in the room is going to be like, oh, I know what you're talking about. I'll tell you what I know, right? That's not what true listening is. So really listening to all that they want to share with you, and creating space for them to talk until they're done talking, and validating them through that and letting them know, hey, I understand why you may have reacted this way. I understand this, and it makes sense that these things, it makes sense that you did X, Y, and Z. Validating their experiencing and what they've experienced, and let them know you didn't deserve this. No one deserves this. And empathize with the actions they may have done leading up to this point, and empathize with what actions they want to take moving forward. Because again, I think a lot of us feel this sense of, wow, I need to take control here. I need to call all the right shots, and I need to fix this. But the reality is that when we try to fix things, it means that we're probably not really listening to the person in front of us, because we have it in our mind of what we need to do to fix it, right? We might give that advice of just leave that person, that's going to fix it. But that's not really what it's about, right? We need to ask, what do you want to do moving forward? And empathize with the fact that what they want to do moving forward might not align with what we want to see for them. And just kind of be humble in that we can't orchestrate the next steps of their life. So again, here, avoid saying just leave. It's not easy to just leave. Think about all the reasons why it's difficult to leave any relationship, right? Because it's hard to leave because you may love that person. You may live with them. You may have children or pets with them. You may have invested a lot of time and energy into that relationship, and you don't want to give up on that. All of those things still ring true in an abusive relationship. There's this extra added component of an intentionally crafted power and control dynamic that makes it difficult for someone to just leave. And again, leaving is one of the most dangerous times for survivors, because that's the moment in which somebody who has intentionally crafted this dynamic of power and control is starting to lose some of that power and lose that control, and they feel that, and that leads to sometimes escalation. Like Diane was saying, an escalation is a really high risk factor of increased violence, especially physical violence, or the risk of somebody dying from their abuser. And so leaving someone is something that we need to be really intentional about, and it's not as flippant as just saying you just need to leave them, right? So avoid giving that advice and understand why it's unhelpful to say it. Be upfront. If you are a mandated reporter, be upfront about your reporting responsibilities and offer a confidential alternative. So what this can look like is, if I'm a mandated reporter and somebody has told me that they are experiencing dating violence, I might say, thank you for sharing that with me. It means a lot to me that you trust me with that information. I need to let you know that I am a mandated reporter. And so before you talk to me any further about it, I just want to let you know that means that I'm going to have to file a report with this agency. That agency is going to do X, Y, Z with that report. Would you prefer to continue talking to me because I'm completely here to talk to you, or would you prefer to talk to a confidential support agency? And so that's important because it offers power and control back to the other person, right? They get to decide what they want to do next, right? And so this next bullet point of identify ways to offer power and control back to that person. If everything they've experienced in their relationship has been them having power and control taken away from them and control being exerted over them, and you add on this other layer of them being a young person in the society where adults have power and a control over their lives and their day-to-day, their schedule, right? It's really important to identify what ways can I make sure I'm offering power and control back to them, because that's been at the root of what's been taken away from them. And so the best way to do that is by asking, what are your immediate needs? What are your immediate concerns? And not assuming that their immediate need or concern is to get away from their partner, not assuming that their immediate need is to leave the relationship, not assuming that their immediate need is to seek out support from law enforcement, right? A lot of folks aren't comfortable with that route. And so listening to what it is that they want to do next and identifying what ways you can support them in that process. So another thing you can do is identify ways to increase supportive networks. So if you are watching this and you're realizing you've never had a conversation with your school social worker or your school counselor, or there isn't a clear reporting protocol process at your school site, identify ways to make that a reality, right? So that everyone is ready to support on this, because it's happening, right? TDV is happening, I'm confident, on every single school campus in San Diego County, and certainly larger than that. And so making sure that there are systems in place where people know their role and people know what are we going to do when we're made aware of this, because it's happening, and are we prepared for that? And not just what are we going to do to make sure we cover our bases in regards to like mandated reporting laws and legal things as well, but how are we going to make sure that our processes are set up in a way that is supportive to the person, to both people, right? Supportive to the people directly involved in the harm. Practicing upstander intervention. So this is something, as a prevention specialist, this is something that I teach students about often, but it's the idea of being a bystander, somebody who stands by, versus being an upstander, which is someone who stands up. And especially, this is for everyone, but especially young people watching this, if you see something happening between two people, you see these warning signs, you see these red flags, do you feel comfortable being the person to call it out or call somebody in about their behavior? And I don't just mean, on one hand, I mean checking in with the person who's experiencing harm and saying, are you okay? What support do you need? But I also mean for our friends, when we see our friends causing someone harm, do we feel confident to say, hey, you can't treat someone like that. That's not okay. That's not an okay way to talk to your partner. That's not an okay way to act towards them. And practicing intervention on both sides, because I think a lot of people think about intervention as just talking to the person who is experiencing harm, but it's both, right? And if we as a friend or as a mentor, as a coach, as a teacher, have an opportunity to tell someone else, you can't act like that. That's not an okay way to treat someone. That's powerful, and that's an important teaching and learning moment for someone else. And then lastly, be aware of the available resources and practice warm referrals. So you've all seen this video, you've seen our faces, you now know us. If you need to make a referral, please feel free to reach out and try to not be the person who says, call this hotline, right? Because I don't know how many times I've shared our agency's hotline with students, but I don't think I've ever, I don't know how many actually take me up on that, right? Or I've given my personal number, my personal work line out to folks, and I've never gotten a call, right? Because just handing someone a number isn't really supportive, right? It's one step in the right direction, but if we can follow it up with saying, hey, I know someone who works at this agency, they do really great work, her name's Sabrina, do you want me to connect you with her? Right? Something like that. That's powerful. And if, as much as possible, we should try to lean towards that model of a warm referral. Or even on a school site saying, instead of saying, go to the counseling office, saying, I know this counselor, I've worked with her before, it might be beneficial for you to talk to her. What do you think about us walking down there together on nutrition break? Something like that that's warmer or makes someone feel supportive as they're seeking out the next level of support.
Right, and Sabrina mentioned about, the policies, how many schools are making an effort to get their counselors in and interacting with students so that they feel comfortable talking to the school counselor, so that there's actually a concerted effort to start to develop that relationship so that students are turning towards those people who are trained, who are educated to really offer those services versus, again, going to their peers or the internet. And so I think that warm referral is probably one of the most overlooked ways to help someone. Take that student, literally walk them to the counselor's office and say, I'd like to introduce you to so-and-so. It's really important, and so please don't overlook that.
So considerations as we're talking about this for COVID. So one thing is that text or chat lines may be more helpful than call-in numbers when you're referring out. And we'll discuss some of the text and chat lines that are available. But again, if we're thinking about if somebody lives with the person who is causing them harm, having a phone call when that person is either in the room with you or in the next room, or can monitor when you're leaving the house or your apartment, is probably doesn't feel very safe. And to an extent, text and chat lines can also not feel very safe, but it might be slightly more helpful than a call-in number, especially if we think about how averse, as a younger person myself, I just can feel this kind of generational gap between, people who grew up with the normalcy of making a phone call and people who grew up with the normalcy of sending a text message, right? There's a distinct different culture about making a phone call or sending a text or a chat. Be aware of privacy for a student. So if you are, in a Zoom call with a student and, you feel like this is the time to check in, you don't know what you don't see beyond these walls, right? You have no idea what's going on right here or back there, right? And so asking when and where the student would prefer to have that conversation, because even though we might feel this is the perfect time, we don't know what's going on or who else is in the room. Being mindful of ways school platforms can be used for harm. So I talked about this a little bit earlier, but when we know the statistics about how many people experience harm through technology, all forms of technology have the ability to be misused for the purpose of causing harm, right? So if I am sending my students into breakout rooms, right, am I being cognizant of what environment I'm sending them into, right? And I don't mean that students need to be watched 24/7, right? But just being mindful that some people, if I know that two students are dating or have, a contentious sort of relationship or something, sending them into a breakout room together may or may not, based on what I know about them, may or may not be a safe place for that one of them to learn, right? And if folks are logging on to their different platforms for the purpose of being at school and learning in a safe environment, are we making sure that it's actually a safe environment in which they can learn what they need to learn and they are feeling safe at school or at their virtual school at home? We talked about this as well, but signs of physical violence are going to be less obvious, right? I made a joke to somebody the other day that over virtual world, I don't have to put on as much makeup because, you just don't see the blemishes as much, right? And so the same is true for if we're looking for signs of bruising, right? You only see this half of my body, if at all, if I turn my camera on at all. So look for changes in someone's behavior. Especially if you have an existing relationship or knowledge of them, and listen for the signs of power and control. If somebody is talking to you about their relationship or, a friendship in which somebody else is using manipulative behaviors or trying to gain power and control over somebody else, that's probably going to be a warning sign that'll be clear during this virtual world than a physical sign. And young people are more likely to disclose to a friend than to an adult. So make sure that you advertise the confidential support services that are available, and advocate for bystander intervention education. At the very beginning, Diane mentioned that we've coordinated some of the prevention services being offered in San Diego. And so reach out to those people who are providing that prevention education so that students can have really intentional learning about what to do in these situations, how to recognize unhealthy and healthy relationship behaviors, so that students can learn what consent is and have a really fully formed, robust understanding of what consent is. Again, just making sure we're setting up our young people to be those supportive, high quality friendships, right? And making sure that they have the tools they need to address this and to seek out support if they need it. Yeah. Any other thoughts, Dan?
No, I think you really covered it well. Thank you, Sabrina.
So confidential support services that are available. One of them is Center for Community Solutions, where I work, and our website and phone number are there on the screen. Community Resource Center is another one of our great partners. They do work in the North County coastal region. South Bay Community Services doing great work in the South Bay around the Chula Vista, IB areas. WRC in, again, the North Coastal area around Carlsbad. They offer services as well. And then we have the National Domestic Violence Hotline, which you can visit at thehotline.org. And they have several different numbers available. So they have their hotline number. They have a hotline number for folks who are deaf or hard of hearing and need that TTY connection. You can go onto their website and use their chat function, or you can text Love Is to 866-331-9474 and have that text line option. So all of these are confidential support services as opposed to mandated reporter services, which a lot of school-based services are mandated reporter services. Resources for educating, so continuing our own education and the education of others, right? So these are great resources. Break the Cycle has really healthy relationship quizzes, resources and education, and it's for youth, parents, and educators. So all people can find resources at this website. CDC has something called Dating Matters, which is, they have this online training that for educators, for school-based educators, that offers continuing education credit, which I think is a really great resource. They also have training implementation guidelines for parents and students. So a great resource. Futures Without Violence has lots of pre-recorded webinars, information resources. Holla Back has great trainings and current trainings about bystander intervention and de-escalation. Love is Respect is kind of similar to Break the Cycle in that they have these interactive healthy relationship games and quizzes, which are great for young people, great for anyone of any age, truthfully. I enjoy them. But they also have resources, educational materials, and they help support that text and chat line that we talked about on the last slide. OneLove.org is a national organization that does provide educational workshops. And what I like about their services is that they provide workshops that are specifically for parents, specifically for young people and teens, and specifically for educators and preventionists. And then lastly, Teen DV Month. So Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month happens every February, and teendvmonth.org has resource kits for awareness campaigns around TDV Awareness Month, which we abbreviate as TDVAM. So October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, DVAM, and the color is purple. And Teen DVAM is in February, and the color is orange. And so if you want to participate in getting the word out, spreading awareness, that's a great resource for you all. Taking action moving forward. So our call to action for you all is that when you leave this virtual presentation, you will feel encouraged to have tough conversations with the people in your life. Unpack the media that young people are watching. Check in with your friends and your students, right? So if I, as a young person, if I am watching a show with my friend or I know they've watched it, like maybe I could talk about how, wow, I thought it was weird in the show that that person like threw that person's phone against the wall. And you talk about those different dynamics that we're seeing in media or hearing in music, etc., and use that as a tool, as a jumping off point to be able to talk about this topic. continue your own education. So on the last slide, we talked about all the different online resources for continuing our education, but we also have great groups doing this work, like Diane said, virtually, and pre and post COVID in-person classes on healthy relationships, on consent, on unpacking social norms, on teen dating violence, and have a lot of them tailor their workshops to the requests of folks. So check out our Healthy Relationships class pamphlet and reach out to the folks in the community who are doing this work locally. Additionally, an opportunity for, Diane, did you want to say something?
Just real quickly, those pamphlets have been distributed or are in the process of being distributed to all the school districts. So please keep an eye out for those. Thank
you. And an opportunity for young people who live, work, or are otherwise connected to the community of City Heights. There is a close to home youth leadership team. And so through Center for Community Solutions, there is this grant that is funding intergenerational prevention mobilization in Community Heights. And so that's an opportunity for anyone the ages of 13 to 24, living, working, existing in City Heights, can reach out to this opportunity to get more involved and participate in this community mobilization against sexual violence and relationship violence. And then lastly, February is coming up quick, and February will always be coming up quick, right? And so February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. Let people know about it, and if you feel so inclined, organize a campaign at your school site with any groups that you're a part of, any clubs, and keep spreading the word on not just awareness, but also prevention, right? And so we have this Outrage into Action DIY guide as an example of different campaigns that you could do. And we hope to be offering a January 2021 training on teen dating violence prevention. So today we talked a lot about awareness and resources. Our next step, I think, is talking about how do we prevent this, and how do all of us become preventionists in our community. So look out for that training opportunity and continue that conversation with us. If you have any questions, thoughts, concerns, you can always contact us at our Gmail, which is teendv.sddvc@gmail.com. And keep the conversation going with us, especially since I know if you're watching this, then you weren't able to connect with us in real time. So please feel free. You can always send an email to this and one of us will get back to you and answer. Great.
And I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you to Mara Elliott and the City Attorney's Office for allowing me the time to participate in putting together this super important presentation. And I know Sabrina has had the same support with her organization.
Yes. All right, and with that, I will stop the recording.